Hello, this is Catherine Marie, and you are listening to Long COVID Real Talk. Today, I wanted to talk about mood dysregulation or emotion dysregulation, because I think this is one of the symptoms of long COVID that is not talked about that much. And I think it's a really prominent one and an alarming one. And I want to make sure that if you are having this, you are aware of why, that you're not alone, that it's not you, it's the long COVID, and different ways to consider resolving it if at all possible. So, okay, I think the first type of person that gets long COVID is like me. They already have anxiety, depression, ADHD, what have you, and long COVID made them worse. I think that in some ways, this group is the luckier group because they already know how to manage their mental health, presumably. And for instance, I already had set up the appropriate supports, therapy, etc., and was already taking medication. And I just had to adjust the medication. I had to get some extra mental health help, which I'll go into in a little bit. The second group are the people that get long COVID and have no history of mental health stuff. And I think these people find the emotion dysregulation to be extremely alarming because they have no history of it. They've never, they might have gone through a sad period or something in their life or bereavement or something, but nothing that would warrant a DSM-5 diagnosis, which is the mental health Bible is the DSM-5. That's where you can read up on all the different diagnoses and what criteria you would meet to have those diagnoses. But these are people that have never met criteria for any diagnosis before, and so all of a sudden they're sobbing, they're crying, they're having their mood is just all over the place, and they're feeling just a lot of, as my daughter would say, having a lot of big feelings, right? So it's understandable that if you never had any issues with mental health, that all of a sudden you're experiencing all of this and you are thinking, what the heck is going on? What do I do? Am I going crazy? All that stuff. So first of all, I do not think you're going crazy. I think that long COVID is affecting your brain. I think it affects everybody's brain, but some more than others. The people who already were dealing with mental health stuff before long COVID are a step ahead of you because they already know, where to get therapy usually. They already know how to get medication usually. So this is a new group of people that needs mental health help. And it's frustrating because it's not you. It's not your genes, it's not genetically you, it's long COVID. Long COVID has affected your brain. And we know all sorts of ways that long COVID has changed our health for the worse. And this is one of those ways. So I wanted to tell you that it's really, really common to have a lot, just to sob and to be very emotional all of a sudden. I think that for me, when I found out that I was going to have to probably retire and not work as a nurse practitioner anymore after I've spent so much of my life going to school, doing clinicals, and it's just a lot of energy and blood, sweat, and tears went into all of the training for this. And then, of course, I enjoy my job, so that made it even more difficult. So when I realized around Christmas last year that I was not going to be able to come back to work because I had the worst flare up I've ever had, right around that time. That was when mentally I hit a wall and I started sobbing a lot. I remember sobbing. I was talking to my doctor, the one who prescribes my medication for mental health stuff, and she was, kind of looking at me and I'm sobbing, in our appointment, and she said, "I think you need a higher level of care." So, I want to explain these different levels of care because I don't want you to be scared of them. I want you to just know what's available and what is appropriate for each level. Um, she recommended a partial hospitalization program. So let me explain. There are three levels of care for psychiatric mental health support. The most intense one is inpatient hospitalization, and that is when you are on a secured unit. You are being monitored every 15 minutes approximately, and that is because the concern is that they don't want you to harm yourself or anyone else. And the anyone else is just part of the phrase, but in reality, you would be there because they were worried you would harm yourself. If you are passively suicidal and you're kind of thinking, oh, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, that would be okay, usually you're not going to be there. There has to be a risk of you harming yourself. Um, so I was not at that point. I went in and I said, I am not suicidal, but I totally understand why someone would kill themselves because this is terrible. Living with long COVID is absolutely horrible, and it's hard to exist living with long COVID. I went to an intake with either a social worker or a licensed marriage and family therapist, LMFT. I cannot remember which one it was, but I remember they handed me a release of information form just to write down my doctor's and therapist's names and my husband's name so that they could share information with them and help, just make sure everyone was on the same page. And I remember looking at it, and this is a form that I've seen a million times, and just become so confused. I couldn't remember where to put whose name, what line I was supposed to sign on. It was just so bizarre. And as soon as realized it was happening, I was mortified and I just started sobbing. I was just beside myself with frustration and feeling like, oh my gosh, what is happening? I feel like such an idiot. All of these things are going through my head. They were very nice, of course, and let me calm down and gave me some tissues and everything. But they recommended the partial hospitalization for me. Partial hospitalization is when you are living at home, but you are going into the hospital in an outpatient setting um, every day for anywhere from 4 to 8 hours. I think for me it was 6 hours. And then after the partial hospitalization for a couple of weeks, then they step you down to intensive outpatient where you're there for 3 hours a day. And all of the things that they have you do when you're there include occupational therapy, art therapy, group therapy, individual therapy, all these different things. And you also see a psychiatrist to change your mental health medication if you so need it. And it's good because you are being evaluated and supported much more than in an outpatient setting where you see mental health providers once every month, maybe for therapy every week. It's just a much more intense level of support, which I really needed. And just because I have a background as a mental health social worker, and just because I'm a nurse practitioner did not make it any easier for me to admit that I needed to go to do a partial hospitalization. It freaked me out, and I did not want anyone to think I was crazy or whatever, but I in these situations, it's kind of like the shower chair, like you realize finally that you really need something. And then you think, well, gosh, why didn't I do this sooner? Right? Because it ends up helping. Anyway, it was a really good experience for me. It really helped me start to process what was happening in my life, how long COVID completely just was like a bomb that went off in my life, just completely changed my life. I mean, you could say ruined my life, but I'm hoping that there will be a silver lining. And like, for instance, the podcast, I love the podcast. That's been a silver lining for me. It is so fun to meet different people and to give other people a voice, and talk about different things that matter. I love talking about things that matter, like mental health stuff, like emotion dysregulation, and how to get special, extra mental health support. These are things that I love talking about because it matters. I'm terrible at small talk if you ever met me in real life. But anyway, bringing it back around, if you're having a lot of emotion dysregulation, I really recommend reaching out to your doctor about it, just your primary care doctor. Just telling them like how you're feeling. If you do not have intent or a plan to complete suicide and you have passive suicidal ideation only, the only reason that they still may recommend that you go inpatient psychiatry would be because of the level of depression that you're having, because they might want to change your medication more quickly and to get you kind of um, lifted up a little bit faster than in an outpatient setting or partial hospitalization setting. But when I was in the partial hospitalization setting, they wanted to start me on Abilify, which is aripiprazole. And technically it's a second generation antipsychotic. And I was freaked out because of the class of drug that it's in. And it took me a while to research it and realize that just like low dose naltrexone is used for people who are trying to stop drinking alcohol, but at a low dose, they have different chemical properties. Similarly, Abilify at a low dose can be really, really helpful for people with long COVID and with chronic fatigue. So they started me on a low dose of Abilify. I immediately felt better. My mood got better. I was no longer laying around like a dead fish. I just was more present. I was able to think more clearly. I was not crying all the time. I just seemed to be able to pull myself together a little bit more easily. So I hate sharing stuff like this because it's really, I mean, I didn't even really want to go to do a partial hospitalization program and then an intensive outpatient program because there's a stigma, mental health stigma. Like nobody wants to say like, oh yeah, I had to go to a partial hospitalization for my mental health. Like it sounds really bad, or at least to me it sounds really bad, but I'm sharing it because if it just helps one person to normalize it for them so that they can get the help that they need. Like long COVID is no joke, man. Like this is, I try not to swear at all on this podcast just in case there are little children in a seat or something in the car. But I just, I, long COVID is the most horrible thing ever. I would never wish it on anyone. And how it changes everything in your body is just insane. So anything that you can do that would support you more and give you more resources, whatever, to help you get through the long COVID is to something to consider. That's all. But yeah, even though I'm a social worker and a nurse practitioner, it did not make it much easier for me to get help myself. But I'm really glad I did it. And my brain has been much more stable since then. My moods have been good. I'm not just crying at the drop of a hat. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share today. So I think that's it. Please rate, review, like, subscribe, whatever the thing is for whatever platform you're listening to this on. Please give us 5-star review, share with people that have long COVID or your family and friends, because I try to make it so that it will help friends and family of people with long COVID as well. But thank you for listening, and I appreciate you tuning in, and I wish you the best, and we'll talk again real soon. Okay, take care. Bye.